The 2008 financial crisis wasn't caused by one evil mastermind. It was caused by a system that rewarded bad behavior. Hey everybody, welcome back. And today we're going to be talking about the Great Financial Crisis and how it was a misalignment of incentives at every level. So before I get into how it was a misalignment of incentives, there's some definitions and some context that we have to go through first. First, we have to know what a mortgage is. I'm sure most of you already do, but a mortgage is just a loan amount that the bank is willing to give to somebody who's buying a house when they don't have all the cash themselves or don't want to use the cash to buy the house straight out. A second important term is subprime lending. Loans made to people with poor credit histories. That's all it is. Riskier loans to people with a worse track record. Some key programs that allowed this subprime lending to happen, or that really was subprime lending, are ninja loans and 0% down programs. So there were programs, and they still exist today, but not as much as they did back then, called ninja programs, which is no income, no job, no assets. With no income verification, no job, no assets, you could qualify to go buy a home with some of these programs. And then you had 0% down programs, which means that the person that was paying these mortgages had zero equity in the property, which you can already see is maybe a slippery slope, right? So let's get into how that ended up making everything crumble. So first, we have to break down what's called a mortgage-backed security. Basically, it's not too important, and hopefully throughout the length of this video, you guys get a better understanding for what a mortgage-backed security is, if you don't already know. But a mortgage-backed security is basically like Wall Street turned a bunch of mortgages into a big smoothie and sold slices of it to investors, okay? Hopefully that made sense. And if it didn't, just bear with me. It'll start to make sense as we keep going. Why were mortgage-backed securities so popular? Historically, real estate was considered safe, steady, and uncorrelated with the stock market. So the key buyers would be pension funds, insurance companies, and most importantly, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are government-sponsored enterprises, which means at the end of the day, it's backed by the government, which means it's backed by you and me, the taxpayer. Okay, great. We got all of our big definitions out of the way, and now we can get into the incentives cascade. I'm going to explain this in a bottom-up structure. A lot of times we hear the 2008 financial crisis explained from these big institutions that package these really fancy financial instruments and the whole thing went kaboom, right? But I'm going to take a bottom-up approach so that maybe it's a little easier to understand how really just human nature and human behavior is the reason that the tower came crumbling down. We're going to start with the home buyer. Now, if you're a home buyer and let's say your job has been shaky over the last couple of years, you don't really have that great of an income, yada, yada, yada. Not the greatest credit score, but you're turning the corner, right? There are loan programs that now will allow you to live in a nicer house than you would have otherwise been able to. So if I'm a home buyer and I'm going, well, shoot, I can go and live in this $3 million house that, yeah, maybe I'm stretching it a little bit, but hey, I'll be fine. I'm really gonna turn this thing around and I'll be able to make the payments, right? I can buy a house with no money down, sure, right? You could see how as an individual, you would be incentivized to use those programs because they allow you access to things that you wouldn't otherwise maybe have access to. But who's giving out these slightly dubious loans? It's loan officers. And of course they would be giving out these loans. They make commission on each loan. So heck, they're gonna write as many as possible. And then you go up the chain one step further. Now you get to banks. So the bank is incentivized to give out as many loans as possible. And you might be thinking, well, Matthew, why would they be giving out these loans if they know that they're maybe shaky or the foundation of them isn't that strong? Because the banks aren't the ones that keep them. They give out these loans and then they pool them and package them into a mortgage-backed security. I told you guys I would come back to it. So this mortgage-backed security is then sold to somebody else, to different investors. So they offload that risk completely, right? Why wouldn't I give out all these loans? I'm not the one that has to hold the bag, right? So you could see how the home buyer, sure, they want to get a better house. So they might do something that is lacks maybe some financial wherewithal, right? And then the loan officer is going to give out as many loans as possible because the bank rewards them for doing that via commission and other incentives. And then the bank is incentivized to just not even keep those loans. And that's where investment banks come in. And it keeps going, so bear with me. So we're gonna hit the brakes a little bit. We're gonna pause because now I have to explain the difference between a traditional bank and an investment bank. And obviously, this is a very simplistic version and a reductive version of what they do. So take this with a grain of salt. So a traditional bank takes deposits and makes loans, like mortgages. They're regulated more heavily, especially post-depression. And they make their money off of the interest from loans. So if they loan $1 million at 8% interest, they make the money off of the interest. Now, investment banks buy, package, and sell these loans as securities. So an investment bank will go to the bank and buy these loans off of them, package them up, and sell them as securities to investors, like I was talking about earlier. Now, these investment banks operated under much, much looser regulations pre-2008, right? And that's really why we had a lot of this big collapse, because it was still a new market and there wasn't that much oversight. And the investment banks make money off of structuring and selling the deals, not from the interest. So just to break that down, traditional banks originate loans. Investment banks package and sell those loans to investors. Wells Fargo will give you a mortgage, then a firm like Lehman Brothers will bundle that mortgage with thousands of others and sell it to a pension fund in Norway, right? And this is also why it's called the global financial crisis, because you had many other countries that were investing in American markets under the guise of these very secure mortgage-backed securities with AAA ratings that ended up losing the shirt off their backs. Okay, so we're back to our list. We left off at the banks and now going into the investment banks. The investment banks say, well, let's bundle these up and sell them to investors that are hungry for returns. And investors really, really wanted mortgage-backed securities at the time. There was such a crazy demand for them. There was this worldwide frenzy for these mortgage-backed securities because they were seen as such a safe thing to invest into because it was backed by the American housing market, right? So there was this incredible demand from investors. So the incentive for these investment banks was, well, we want to bundle these and package as many as we can to sell it to these guys because they want them, right? There's a demand for it. And then that gets down to the bank, down to the loan officer, down to the home buyer. And then it gets a little more complicated, which brings us to step number 5, which are these credit rating agencies. You might be thinking, okay, well, these investment banks were selling them, but there must be like some sort of regulation in place to make sure that it's actually what they say they're selling, right? And that's right. There were credit rating agencies. But there's a catch here. Credit rating agencies would make their money from the investment banks. So the credit rating agency is saying, well, they paid us to rate it. Sure, slap AAA on that thing. So let's dig into these credit rating agencies and why they might have been giving them an inflated rating, right? So we're gonna have to break this down step by step. Investment banks would take a pool of mortgages and want to sell it as an MBS. Before selling it, however, they had to go to a credit rating like Moody's, S&P, or Fitch, and the agency would assign a rating to the MBS, AAA being the safest, which is equivalent to US Treasuries, by the way. The higher the rating, the more desirable and profitable the MBS is to sell. So where was the misaligned incentive here? You might be able to catch the funky smell in the air, the fish in the air, right? But the credit rating agencies were paid by the investment banks whose products they were rating. This creates a kind of pay-to-play conflict. Agencies were incentivized to give higher ratings so investment banks would keep coming back to them instead of a competitor. If Moody's says it's risky, but S&P gives it a gold star, well then guess who's getting the next $5 million rating job? You can also understand it like this. It's like getting a grade on a test, except you're paying the teacher to grade it. And if they give you a bad grade, you can just go pay a different teacher. This matters because investors really trusted these AAA ratings without understanding the real risk inside the bundles. Many MBS were filled with high-risk subprime loans. And when those started defaulting, Even AAA rated MBS collapsed in value, triggering panic and massive losses. So now we understand why these credit rating agencies would maybe give inflated ratings to these investment banks, because they wanted their business. They were incentivized to give maybe inflated ratings for the money. And this is when it all started crumbling. Rising interest rates, adjustable rate mortgage resets, foreclosures started rising, and mortgage-backed securities started defaulting. Housing prices started falling, causing a huge liquidity crisis. And another issue is that banks just now didn't know how to value what they were holding. Some famous collapses during this time, or infamous collapses, were Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns. Who picks up the tab for all of this? Unfortunately, it's the taxpayer, people like you and me. This is where the Federal Reserve and TARP, which is the Troubled Asset Relief Program, step in. The Fed starts buying huge amounts of MBS, mortgage-backed securities, to inject liquidity to prevent a full collapse. And that's just a fancy word for saying they had to print a bunch of money to buy these distressed mortgage-backed securities. The taxpayer-backed rescue kept the system from imploding. So at the end of the day, it comes at a cost to everybody. This wasn't some conspiracy. It was a perfect storm of short-term thinking, incentive misalignment, and unchecked optimism. And sure, there might have been some bad actors in the system and some people who profited massively off of this and maybe saw it coming. But at the end of the day, it was just a misalignment throughout the whole system because there wasn't really regulation on any of this stuff. When no one is responsible for the whole system, everyone is incentivized to take a little extra risk because they don't have a part to play in the accountability, at least in the short term. Obviously, in the long term, everybody kind of paid the price. So what do you guys think? Are our incentives better today, or is it just a matter of time before this all comes crumbling down? If you found this breakdown helpful, drop a like or share it with somebody who still blames greedy bankers, because it's more complicated than that. And if this was still super confusing, leave a comment down below and I'll try to clarify or something if you guys had any questions. Again, this is not any financial advice. This is just my opinion and my perspective on what happened in 2008. And hopefully I was able to share it in a way that made a little more sense than some of the other videos that are out there. But anyways, thank you guys, and I'll see you later. See ya.